what's up? Vinny Camo here with another episode of Behind the Pulse. I'm super excited about this episode with Peter Moore. We actually hit it off pretty well immediately, and before I even realized that I was recording, we kind of had some good banter going. So I decided to leave it in. So for the first couple of minutes, I hope you enjoy our talk, and then I'll kind of do the traditional intro. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy.
Lots of other jobs is more, on-site experience really, and you learn as you go. There's a ton of event management courses now at college, and especially in the UK, we're inundated with people want to do event management, or they suddenly want to be the next superstar around the block. And you think, yeah, that's all well and good, but don't get me wrong, education will give you a certain amount of what you need to know. But as soon as you leave that campus or that college, then it's sort of smacks you in the face really, and welcome to the big bad world really.
That's why, like, what I try to do while in college, because I was fortunate enough to know what I want to do out of college. I think that's a big thing. A lot of young people don't know, and they're studying business, or they're just doing accounting or something. I was really working hard on getting that experience around town. I was fortunate to go to college in a city that wasn't too big, wasn't too small, was affordable. I was in California, but it was Northern California, so it was affordable. So I could afford to go to shows after I got off school, and get that experience. So I was like doing shows around town. I was meeting with promoters around town. I was meeting with the venues, working with the venues around town. So I was kind of doing that dual student, getting the studies done, but also learning how to network, learning how to get shows going while doing it.
Yeah, no, I think it's it's certainly the best way to go, because if you sort of sit back and let it all think it's going to happen and come to you, then it just doesn't work like that. So you've certainly done it in the right way, and sort of the way that I did it really. You've got to make a sort of a nice nuisance of yourself really, just to and I think people appreciate that really, because I think if you ask the right question, or if you, at least you're polite about it and actually go about your day in a positive way, then most people are pretty open really. I think it's just you get the odd one or two that maybe not, but it's the only way to do it, I think, really, is mix both education with online, on the ground experience really. It's good.
Absolutely. I'm feeling pretty good to get started here. If you're ready, I think I'm ready.
Yeah, very good.
Let's get right into it here. I would like to welcome you as my next guest on Behind the Pulse podcast, Peter Moore. Thank you so much for joining me.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to join you today, Vincent. And good to speak with you and dig into our conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We got plenty to talk about today, because I found you on LinkedIn, was very impressed by your experiences you've had in our intro conversations we've had. It seems like not only do we kind of have some similarities, I'm just a little bit younger than you by a few decades. So I'm looking forward to talking to you about how you've seen the music industry change over those decades, and especially international, because you are based out of the UK, but also have lived in America as well. So I'm curious to see, how you seen things change over time.
Yeah, it's sort of going back to the day when I first started promoting, and it was everything on the run, and where you get your flyers sort of printed, and you get your posters printed, and you'd actually do everything on the ground, and everything was sort of quite organic at that point. I think it was about 2000, and I can't remember the exact dates, maybe 2002, something like that. I sort of attended quite a big music seminar in New York. It was effectively one of the governing bodies in the UK, that every year it was the indie labels meet the major labels in New York, and they also did it in Los Angeles as well. So I went to New York, and it was really, really good. And the similarities of when I was working the labels are pretty much the same. The only one difference that I found was a lot of the financing, the funding, come out of the States for the British labels. But the promoters was quite level playing field. I've never promoted a show in America, but I did meet a few promoters along the way that obviously did do. But there was quite a lot of similarities to what they did to what we did. The flyers at the point, posters, online wasn't really that big at that point. It was coming through, but no one really sort of paid much attention to it. So it was more of the groundwork, sort of, I suppose, foot soldiers, really, getting your team on the ground, putting out flyers, putting out posters, talking to people. So the internet was a little bit sort of far reaching at that point. But the similarities, I would say, probably still today with the US and the UK, is that um, the acts cross over extremely well. If you tend to find that you've got a big headline act that's performed in the US, whether it's Coachella, they will come over to the UK and do Glastonbury, do Tea in the Park, they do Reading and Leeds. So it seems a natural progress that would always happen, and you always get US acts, new up and coming acts as well. And I think that works well with the UK acts that will go to the US as well. So I think those similarities will always be there, which is always, I suppose my first time in New York, I didn't expect any of that, but it was refreshing to see and, to move that forward. So yeah, it was really good.
You mentioned it kind of quickly in there, but did you say that in the UK there's state sponsored music labels?
No, there are certain things that can happen in the UK where you can get support from different organisations that maybe can help pay for rent in your office. You may be able to get a little
Okay.
bit of support from the creative. There was a, whether it still exists now, I'm not sure, Vincent, but there was a sort of a creative program that the UK government produced where they would help creatives get on the ladder and maybe provide creative space. They would provide maybe sort of reduced broadband, maybe grants for certain. There are certain things they do today, but I've never, no, not a state label. But there are certain creative things that can be done in the UK for sure.
Okay. Yeah. I was going to be pretty shocked by that, but that sounds
No,
like.
there's no free, no free money. No.
Okay. That seems universal then.
And if it is, you've got to do so much for it, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's start back at the beginning of your career because I was also an athlete. I was not a semi-pro athlete like you, but I was an athlete in high school. Kind of wanted to play in college, and then I went through an injury, which kind of caused me to go on my path to start my career in the music industry as opposed to trying to do sports anymore. So, could you talk about how your playing of soccer kind of caused you, and then your injury caused you to kind of get propelled into working in the music industry?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that as well, Vince. I think I've come across quite a lot of people over the years that have had injury. I was chatting to a chap just before Christmas that sort of was recommended to us and works in the insurance business on the entertainment side. And he said the same thing to me. He played professional football back in the day and he had a bad injury and he got retired and ended up working in insurance. So yeah, it's funny how things sort of come around really. I from an early age, about 7, 8 years old, I was just kicking the ball around really, and that took me up to the age of sort of 18, 19, 20. Sort of pushed my career all the way through. I was lucky to play at a really good standard. I was extremely quick when I was young, and my mum and dad supported me. My sort of dad came home one day and he said to my mum, "Actually, I've just watched Pete play, and he's pretty good actually. So I think I want to support him as much as I can." And that's what my mum and dad did. So really, all I wanted to do, Vincent, really at a young age was play football. Really, I've sort of had the going back to primary school. I had the slight injury at primary school, which I didn't really know I had, and I sort of missed schooling at that point in my sort of very junior years. So I got held back for a year. So I stayed on for another year to prepare me for the going to obviously the next school, my secondary grammar school, which helped my injury and sort of pushed me forward a bit more. So that was a good, looking back, that was actually quite a good time because I went up to the sort of bigger school with an extra year. So I was older than most people. And plus my injury healed and the headmistress at the time was quite supportive of that. And then really I got into school, sort of my secondary grammar school. And again, I carried on playing football and one of the teachers there picked up on me and it sort of went from there really. I ended up playing for sort of different clubs, ended up in France, um, playing out there for a while. And it just, uh, that's all I really wanted to do. And I thought that's all that was going to happen effectively. And then my injury started, my ankle just kept breaking down. I just sort of bothered me after a while. And it finally came to the point where I came back from France when I was sort of 16, maybe 17. I was going to sign sort of professional terms at that point, and the physiotherapist said that, and the doctor, we can sort of pass him 90% fit, but there's still that 10% chance that his ankle's going to break down. And it was just one of those things. And unfortunately, my career was, I still carried on playing, but I suppose I don't know how you felt, but I sort of got, I got back to the UK. My dad, I was pretty fed up, to be perfectly honest with you. That's all I really wanted to do, and it's all I was pretty good at, really. And he said to me, "Well, why don't you play for one of the local teams?" And that sort of, for me, was just like a red rag to a bull. It was like, I've just played in France. I was lucky to play with one of the top teams in France, and I was grateful for that. And I'm coming back to play local football, and I thought, oh, I don't really want to do that. But my dad didn't want really work on. He didn't want me to work on the farm. My dad had worked on the farm for a long time. It's a fruit farm, so it's apples, pears, plums, strawberries, all that type of fruit. Oh, don't get me wrong, fantastic upbringing, Vincent. My mum and dad weren't wealthy, just normal mum and dad. But what I did have was, great food, warm bed, plenty of running around in fields to kick a ball around, and that was good. But my dad didn't want me to work on the farm. There was no money in it, and he'd been proved right over the last sort of 25, 30 years, really. And then that's how I always had a love for music, really. Didn't know really what I wanted to do in that area, but I just knew I liked music. And I thought, well, this could be an interesting way to go. I'm not going to be doing what I really wanted to do, but I also didn't want to do a job that was just 9 to 5. And I just didn't really want to do that, even though I did a few part-time jobs within that. That was fine. And then I started getting the bug more for the record industry, and I sort of really started, I suppose, pounding the streets, really. So I had to go to London. So my way into London was effectively, I grew up in a little village. So I had to get a bus into the next town, and then from that town, I'd get a train into London. So again, my dad supported me for travel up to London. And then I just I just wanted the experience of thinking, oh, maybe I could get a job in the record industry. And I kid you not, Vincent, 2 years of me going into London. I wasn't going into London every day, but I would go probably twice a week, maybe sometimes 3 times a week. And that was sort of pushing it. And then I would actually work part-time on the farm. So my dad would say to me, okay, I can't cover all of your travel, and all, I wouldn't expect him to do that either. So he said, you come and work at the weekends or 2 days a week, and then we'll see how that goes. And that worked out well. But it was 2 years before I actually got offered a job, and that I got to the point where I just got totally fed up with that as well, because I was thinking, oh my God, what is actually going on?
Yeah.
So that was a real enlightening experience. Ended up landing a job at Labour in London. And my sort of role was making the tea. So I got very good at making tea. I got very good at making coffee. Sometimes I'd make tea and coffee for sometimes 100 people. So my whole morning, yeah, that was a real. If you ever go and do that job, or if you ever go into a big company and you have to do that, honestly, it teaches you phenomenal amounts. Because what I learned was, not only did I know how people took their tea and coffee, and trust me, when you're actually dealing with managing directors or A&R directors or senior managers in the label, you get to know everybody. So you get to know how they like their tea. The first week is a complete headache, because I'm thinking, I don't know what people want. So you get quite a lot wrong, and then you get it right. But it is true. It's the grounding of where you meet people. So I learned an awful lot, and I stuck my nose into promotion. I stuck my nose into A&R. I even stuck my nose into the chairman at some time to sort of say hello. And they were all really, I can't really have a bad word, really. They're all really positive people.
Yeah.
The one thing I did learn was I got made redundant, and over sort of probably about maybe a year, 14 months, something like that. And the people I was working with, they were promoting some of the biggest acts in the world, all the PR, the press. And they said to me, look, you really need to do your own thing, because the industry, this was back in 93, maybe 94, try and create your own thing, because the industry is going to go through quite a big change. And obviously they knew things that I didn't. Obviously the internet and certain things are going to come along, and they knew it was changing. And most of the people that I worked, they all left. Some of them got made redundant. So I was back on my backside again, thinking, "Oh dear, what are we going to do now?"
Yeah. So when they say started from the bottom, you were really there at the bottom of this label, making tea for people, and really just trying to kind of learn all the things you could from that low position.
Yeah, didn't get paid really any money. Again, it was travel expenses that I got. I got food vouchers, so you could have your lunch if you got in early as well. It's difficult for me to get in really early because I had an hour and a half sort of train ride and sort of half an hour car ride really. So it's difficult for me to get in at 7 o'clock in the morning. But I didn't really get a lot of money. Yeah, started at the bottom and sort of got to go to gigs as well. So you would get, um, maybe one of the junior A&R managers would come in and say, "Oh, I've got a band playing at the 100 Club in London, or I've got a band playing the Metro Club, which are iconic venues in London, which the 100 Club is still there." So you get to go along and you get to see the live experience. And that was my sort of, I suppose, inauguration of sort of experience in live music, really. And I
Yeah.
thought, wow, what is this all about? This is cool. And it's free, so I don't have to pay to go in. Um, and suddenly you're talking to the promoter on the door, or you're talking to the publicist for the band, and you think, I used to think, oh, this is actually really good. Um, so the money at that point was sort of insignificant because I was, achieving all of that, and I was eating all the food I could eat. That was fine, and I wouldn't have to pay to go into venues. And then sometimes the funny thing was, because the label will get lots of submissions for artists, lots of demo CDs coming in, Vincent. One of my tasks was actually to go through. But one of the funny things is that I went through a sort of a week's period of looking at about 1,000 CDs
Wow.
because they were just sitting in a room. So the A&R people said, "Oh, we've got a load of CDs. We haven't got time to go through any of that. Go and have a look. If you find something, bring it to the desk." And I found probably two or three that I thought were actually really good. They were sort of rock at the time. One was a metal band, and at that point, still then, you had to get sort of, it was a decision by committee to get anything through. None of them got through, which was unfortunate. I did see one of the bands playing; they were really, really good. One of the metal acts, and they were very good, but it just didn't work out. And I kept the CDs, so that was that. But there's
Nice.
nothing like learning from the ground up, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it sounds like it was really important in the beginning of your career to be focused on getting that experience. And you've said a lot that you weren't worried about how much money you were making as long as you were able to eat some food and you're able to have somewhere to sleep at night. How important is it, do you feel like, even now, especially for people maybe starting out, to just get as much experience as possible and not worried about how much they're getting paid?
Yeah, I I think it's really important. I think, and one of the ways I sort of typify this, Vincent, is if you go to college and you come out of school, and you want to go and learn whatever you want to learn, especially in this industry, and they suddenly want to become, head of A&R for Sony or head of A&R for Universal, and that's a big job and that has a big salary to it. People think, well, I could just walk in and do that job. No, you can't. You need a decade of experience before you're even
Yes.
considered to do that job. So I think the biggest advice that I would give people, and what was given to me, is that if you learn from the ground up, um, and you go and make the coffee for, the head of A&R for Columbia Records, for example, or you doing, head of A&R for Sony, and you're making them a tea, they actually really appreciate that. And then they turn around to you and say, "Oh, sit down, have a couple of minutes with me. What are you up to?" And I say, "I'm doing this, 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 this," and you get much more information out of that person. One, because you've made them a cup of tea,
Yeah.
yeah, and two, they actually probably want to take a break and they actually listen to what you've got to say, and that you've got the opportunity with that 5-10 minutes or whatever to actually ask them a few questions and not bombard them, but just have a general conversation. And then when you see them again in a couple of weeks, or the next day, you can just say hi, thanks, and you build up that rapport. So I think I think that's integral for any person coming into any business, really. But I would say even more so the entertainment industry, because you can't be expected to walk into 100,000 a year job because one, they don't exist, and two, if you did do that, you'd probably be fired within a couple of days because you don't understand what you're doing. So it's I would endorse that wholeheartedly. Try and get as much experience as you can, but there is a balance. There's a balance of getting the experience and the company or the people not sort of taking massive advantage of what you do. And I think there's a balance with that.
Yeah.
Um, and
Especially
I
like
think,
getting exploited. I
yeah,
saw,
yeah,
I was going to college in a very student city, and I saw some stuff going on that I felt like people were doing a lot of work for these companies in the music industry that were getting back very little.
yeah,
And they weren't getting that face to face time with people and really getting experience. And I saw like, wow, like you're doing all that work just for, you know, this little reward. Like, is that really worth it in the
yeah,
long run? But it sounds
yeah,
like in your experience, if you're actually working with labels or with professionals that have a lot of experience getting those positions, to speak with them even if you're not getting paid, seems like it really paid off, especially for you, because we'll get into it in a bit. But those connections can really lead you to a successful career down the road.
yeah. It can, and I think I still am, but maybe I was more of an inquisitive nature. Where you'd ask a question, or you'd say, what does that mean, or how does that um, record get put into a shop, or why haven't you taken on that band? What was the reason behind it? And pretty much most of the time, you get a solid answer, um, and you come away thinking, actually, that was quite a rationale answer, really, why that didn't happen. And I think the biggest thing that it took me a long time to understand, Vincent, because when you're young, you don't really understand economics or the mechanics of why a big label exists or why a big company exists, and it
Yeah.
exists to make money. And that's what it took me a long time to understand. Labels can't take on 100 acts and then promote all those 100 acts and expect them all to work. It is a difficult process, and I think that's sometimes what bands, musicians don't or I wouldn't say so much today, but then probably didn't understand. If the label's got 10 metal bands, why do they want number 11? It's doesn't make any sense, really. So yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. And realizing that the music business is a business, and then getting those experiences with the executives or with the higher ups in a major company really taught you that. And it sounds like you approached them in a very humble and inquisitive way, like a genuine nature of just asking questions. Cause I was thinking, what would I ask someone if I was in your position making tea for someone? What would I ask? And I think you just kind of hit the nail on the head there, just approaching them with kind of a genuine inquisitive nature, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that sort of stood me quite well, even in football. Even though that was still very, very tough, and it was, but I took the team aspect from it as well, Vincent. So coming from playing professional football, and you're in a changing room with 15 players, a manager, a physio, assistant coach. You've all got that camaraderie and that strength to go out and win a game. And if you lose, you should all stick together and deal with the loss and get better. When I came into the music industry, I took that ethos with me, but even though it was just me, so I still felt that when I came into a label that I still got a team there. And people didn't know that. People didn't know that with me. Even some of the people that I didn't particularly get on with, and there was a few of them because obviously sometimes they just rub you out the wrong way. But funny enough, sport is a great leveler. So when you go into the canteen one day or you're having a cup of coffee and someone that you didn't particularly get on well with comes over and says, "I didn't know you play professional football." Oh yeah, I did. That conversation just opens up because that person is a supporter of whatever team, Valencia or Sampdoria or Man United, for example, and then you start having a conversation about football. So everything you suddenly become in the light of you're not just a tea boy or the person delivering coffee. You actually play, and you go, "Yeah, I did actually," but
Yeah.
I'm not going to shout about that because I'm here to do this. And then you get the conversation of, I had many of these conversations where they turn and go, yeah, I nearly was professional and it didn't quite work out. And I sort of walk away going, yeah, to myself going, yeah, I bet you did. And after time, it just doesn't happen like that. Um, but yeah, it is quite a good leveler. And I think it is definitely a good way to go, because at the end of the day, the way I looked at it, making tea and coffee, everyone's got to have a drink and eat, and most people just want to have a conversation, really, and that's an opportunity to just try and glean information, really, and just try your best.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit before we were recording. You were able to make some connections at Sony that allowed you to move on in your career. Can you talk about how you were able to get those connections and then you were transitioned into doing events and becoming kind of a promoter in that role?
Yeah, I the first label I got made redundant from, I then went across to it was a small sort of dance label, really, and it was effectively my mum knew the owner's wife. So they had a conversation, said, "Oh, Pete's worked in London for the last bit with a label, and there wasn't any position open at this little label because it was a small label. It was I didn't know it was part of Sony at the time, but it was a small dance label. But they were doing some really cool stuff. So I went and had a few meetings with the owner. I only lived down the road, so that was a lot better. There was only a sort of 25-minute journey down the road, so that was good, and it was over probably 3 or 4, maybe 6 month period that I was talking to them, really, and it inspired that they didn't have any positions, but they were looking to maybe take on someone that could take care of some of the press and maybe some of the manufacturing, and I sort of, I say, talked my way into the job, but it was more of the experience, because I had the experience, that I think that stood me in good stead. So they took me on a trial and ended up working with him for a couple of years, really, from that perspective. They're only a small team, and they sort of invested the label themselves, but they also got support from the label. And they put out, I think, top of my head, maybe four to five compilation albums over the year. And they sold quite a lot of units. I think it was over 1 million records that they sold. So I was then immersed into learning how to put CD into store, doing some of the publicity for the CD, and bearing in mind the internet was coming around then, so
Yeah.
it was all new. That was sort of like, okay, how does this work?
Yeah. What years was this? Like around what
This
time?
was 96, sort of
Okay.
97, and one of the interesting things that coming from a bigger label to a smaller label was that, I suppose, the not the smallness, but the familyness of how they were trying to run things. But
Yeah. Like a
one of
sense
the
of
things that,
community.
yeah, it was the studio was at the back of the house. The team invested all in the studio at the back of the house. So you'd come in and you sort of part of the household, really. There's only a small team of about 3 or 4 people, and I say they put out 4 or 5 albums, and they worked really, really well. I think one of the things that I felt that, not that, well, I suppose that I felt that went wrong, is some of the artists that they took on suddenly became bigger than what they thought they were. And there was a few internal wranglings, and there was a few bits and pieces that didn't quite work. And I think in the end, the owners of the label sort of got fed up with it. They sort of sold the label back. They came away from it. They did punch above their weight for quite a time, but I think it just got to the point where I think they just sort of had enough. And unfortunately, I was let go, and back back drudging the streets again. And that's sort of how I came about. I sort of remember quite vividly coming home and saying to my mum and dad again, "Oh, here we go again." I had enough of the industry at that point, really, because I thought, well, I've had 3 or 4 years, and is this really for me? And I suppose the experience and the people were resonated in my ear, saying, it's you've got to create something for yourself. So that, and I thought to myself, what can I create? I've just seen 2 labels. I know how difficult that can be, and and bearing in mind back in the 90s as well, Vincent, it's expensive to put out a record, and it's
Yeah.
expensive now. But then Oh, dear me, it was ridiculous money. So I then took a call from a friend of mine. He was at Canterbury University, where I sort of grew up in the next village to him, and he just said to me one day, he said, "You're in the record industry," and I said, "Well, I work for labels, but you know,
Sure, I am.
yeah." I've just been made redundant. What do you want? I was sort of, wasn't really that interested. He said, "No, no, no, come into town and we'll have a coffee." And I thought, I probably said something to him like, "Oh, you're paying," or something like that. And anyway, I went in to have a chat with him, and he was one of the heads of the student union. So his he was tasked with was actually putting on the summer ball for this university. It's one of the biggest universities in the country. It's about 20,000 students. And he just said to me over a coffee, he said, "Well, you've worked in the record industry. I've got a summer ball to put together in the next 4 months, and I've got to do it for 5,000 students." And I looked at him and went, "What bloody planet are you on? I mean, you, yeah." And he said, "Well, I want you to do it with me." And I just said to him, "What do I know about putting on events?" He said, "But you've you've gone and sold some records." I said, "Yeah, I've sold some records and worked with some teams." I said, "But I've never put on an event before." He said, "Oh, it'll be fine. It'll be fine." And that's how I sort of had my first experience of actually agreeing to put 5,000 people um, in a field in Kent for a university summer ball. And uh, to be honest with you, I couldn't tell you why I did it, but probably because I didn't have anything else. Football was, I was playing locally, and that was just really getting on my nerves. Um, been made redundant from 2 record companies. I thought, well, that's going well. But yeah, that's how it started.
Wow. So were you getting paid? Did you get paid out after at all?
Yeah, the way it worked was actually that was the integral thing for me, because I turned around to him and said, "I'm not doing this for nothing." I said, If we're going to do this, then I'll have a small fee or retainer." And he managed to agree. He said, "Look, I better swing you sort of a few £100 a month." I was happy with that, and then I got a bonus at the end of the end of doing the event. And the good thing was is that I'm sure you've experienced this, Vincent, with a university crowd coming up to the end of term in June. They all want to go to a summer ball.
Yes.
So everybody wants to. They all want to go. They all want to experience that. But he had to put on something that was a bit better than maybe what the other universities would do in the area. And there was 2 or 3 other quite big universities, but we also had to compete with 2 big private schools in Canterbury. One's called the King's School, one's called St Edmunds, and they are very, very high end public schools. If you Google them, you know what I mean. So we had to compete with those as well, even though they have their own thing. You just had to sort of put on something better than anybody else, if you understand what I'm saying. So
Yeah,
it was,
yeah.
he
That is very much still alive in the event industry to even today. There's kind
yeah,
of an envy in the air when you do events.
yeah, like somebody's had this act down the road, but this college, is only a secondary college, and they've had this act, and you think, well, how did they do that? So we sat down, and I knew the owner of a stately home, which was just outside of the city, and it was a beautiful stately home. It's an 18-hole golf course. Um, Funny enough, it was a catering manager that used to work with my mum. So I got in there, and there was a separate. They called it a chalet, but there's a separate group of chalets next door to the stately home that could house, well, actually was sort of like 50 bungalows that were privately owned. So what they did in a certain time of the year, they would sort of rent them back to the estate so that they could use them for different events, which was actually quite cool. So we came up with the idea of actually doing a package for the students where not only did they get a taxi ride to the stately home, but within their package, they could actually stay over at one of these lovely chalets. And these chalets were fantastic. They were a bit all built in a garden. So you had like a beautiful garden in the middle and all the chalets around the outside. And they were like 3 to 4 bedrooms, some of these. And they were really, really nice. But the proviso was, and this is how I learned event management and take the insurance structure with me very, very avidly. was that the indemnity insurance on the property, we had to fork out the bill. And I said to the university, we need to do this, but we need to protect the building and you need to pay the premium. And it was thousands. They did it because they wanted to give the students the experience. So that was good. So effectively, if anything got broken or damaged, then I knew there was A+ cover, and that was fine. So they were happy to proceed with that. We sort of got on with it. It was about, I suppose, 6 months of planning. We sold the tickets quite quickly. Sold them in about a month, and they was £60 each, so about $80. And we provided 10 acts. So effectively, I suppose I'll take you from the beginning. This first one, they would arrive all in taxis, all prepaid tickets. So some would pay 60, and I think some would pay £100 because they'd be staying over. The kids would get out and they would be greeted by the sort of catering team from the stately home. They get a glass of champagne, they get canopies on the lawn, and then there'd be some nice classical music played. So we'd have like a string quartet that we put together, and that worked really well. And then they would, bearing in mind, then they would lead into the entrance hall of this big stately home. So they would go up the steps of about 250 steps. So we made it a big entrance for them. And within that, there was different rooms. So what we did, they had a marquee at the back of the room where we had, that's where the big acts would play. So they had, over the years, we had Urban Cookie Collective, we had D-Ream, they had the All Saints, all sorts of acts, in different, big, unsigned. And there was 10 acts at the summer ball. It would kick off at 5 and finish about 1. We put a casino in so the kids could sort of have a roulette wheel, and they would just play for chips, and they would win sort of like goodie bags. So like if the girls win, they would get like a shampoo set and a conditioner and 20% off the next haircut. And if the lads won, they would get I don't know, some new rugby boots or some sports gifts, stuff like that really.
Okay.
So we sort of made it quite fun. Because the stately home was big, it was on 3 floors, we was able to put different music in each part of that stately home. So we put reggae in one area, we put sort of urban hip hop in one area, and then we put sort of acid house and dance music in another area. The only one thing that did go wrong, and it went wrong every year, was the toilet facilities were really, really difficult. So they couldn't cope with sort of 5,000 students. So we had to sort of bring in more toilets to accommodate that. A few things went wrong there, but that's sort of how it started. And we had to make sure that the venue was dealt with properly, make sure that the venue was cleared up properly, make sure there was nothing. Bear in mind, this was a 17th century stately home. So it went back to, I believe it was Lord Kitchener that actually was his residence back in the day. And I had to make sure, my job was to make sure that all the chalets were left spotless. And I mean, spotless. So that was an education. But I enjoyed it because I thought, well, if I'm going to do the job, it's got to be done properly. And the university were really happy because they set a budget for the activities and they want to make sure that the students have a great time. But also there's method in their madness where they want new students to come in and actually experience that as well. So it was a win-win really. So we got paid. We had a bonus as well, which was good. I think it might have been £1,000 at the end of it, something like that. And then we rolled on to the next one, and we would do the Christmas ball. But we do the Christmas ball maybe on site at the campus. We wouldn't use the stately home for that. We just use that for the summer ball. And we ended up doing sort of that for 5-6 years, and we worked with about 5 or 6 universities at the time to do that.
Nice.
But yeah, it was good. Certainly, it was good. The one good thing, Vincent, it was good to have a budget to do stuff. We didn't have to go and find any money. So that was really positive. But you had the negative side of it, is that you still had to deliver what the university wanted you to deliver. So you still had the pressure of, if you're going to spend this money, why are you spending this money? And what is that value going to be bringing to, to the university and to the students? So you had, it was swings and roundabouts, really.
Yeah, absolutely. You have a little bit extra money to spend, but also some responsibilities and some obligations.
Yeah, And the biggest obligation for me was actually doing it at the stately, the stately home. There was one year where there was a fireplace that I believe got broken, but the insurance cover was there, so it was fine. There wasn't too much of an issue with that. But the good thing is that I made perfectly sure that whatever happens, the insurance cover has to be in place, because it's the lifeblood of events even today, really. And I think if you go into it not expecting to have proper cover, then you shouldn't really be in a promoter, really.
Okay. So in event production, insurance is key, most definitely.
100%, 100%. It can be the making or the breaking of you, I think. And I think some people will ignore it and just go maybe with public liability. Some won't look at the indemnity or the non-appearance cover. And I think sometimes it's not a good thing to do. If the budget allows for it, then I think you've got to do it, because otherwise you've got to walk away. Because the way I look at it is, if you and I were doing an event and it was $1 million event and something went wrong on the eve, and we couldn't do it on the next day, and we didn't have the proper insurance cover, me and you are liable for $1 million.
Yeah.
And that's not a good position to be in. That's really that's not where you want to be.
Yeah. You quickly went from first events, kind of got reeled into it by a friend, and then you obviously liked it and enjoyed it and were good at it to kind of do it for the next 5-6 years. How did your kind of mindset of these events, or just putting on events in general, change from that first event to then 5 years later? Like how did you grow, and what did you learn in that time?
It was a baptism of fire the first 6 months to a year. I really, to be honest with you, I probably knew 20% of what I was doing, but the other 80% I was learning as I was going along, really. And I was probably working probably 20 hours a day, because everything just had to be right. So when I come away from that, and then you look at your time constraints and what you was doing, I think what I've learned now is timing, and making sure that your time management is good, I think is a really key thing. Um, Lots of the things that I've learned within that were, when you come out of that environment and then you suddenly got the bug and you want to do your own events, you've then got to go and find your own money. And that's an enlightening experience, because when the university, I sort of come away, my buddy was, he was kept on at some of the university to do some of the shows with me. And there was another team that came in, and we eventually sort of parted ways. It was just like a natural progression, really. And I thought, well, maybe I'm going to do something for myself. And there was a couple of wine bars that were looking to do music, regularly. And the good thing with the city where I sort of grew up, just outside, is at between September and Christmas, there's about 35,000 students in the city, and that works between now and May. So you've got a captive audience between that time. How you engage them and get them off campus is quite difficult. So the two wine bars that we looked at, we sort of chose one, and I worked with another chap on this who was really good. He was very good at on the ground. So he was really good at engaging people and basically making people turn up. He would give people great incentives to turn up, and you get free drink here, you get 5 of you come in and you'll get a round free, and plus you get a few shots and this, that, and the other. So he was really good at that. So I said, okay, we'll do it. And it was a small venue to begin with, about 250 people. And the owner said to us, quite openly, said, look, I don't need the money, but I'd quite like to have my place busy on a Wednesday night. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, he would absolutely chock up. We would have accountants, lawyers, business people into his place, lunches, dinners. It really busy. We had a big cellar downstairs, and it was a really nice cellar. So it was a sort of one of these old-fashioned cellars with a winding staircase that went down to the floor, and they had a bar that sat in the middle. It was all made out of concrete, and it was quite eerie, but it was really quite cool. And the sort of venue went right underneath effectively upstairs, so it was a really long way. So he said, we got a license for 250 people. We sort of managed to push that to 280, got the licensing people involved. And he gave us it was sort of more of we didn't have a formal contract. It was a shake hands, and you're going to do this type situation.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, yeah, and we will do that. Luckily, at that point, I knew a lot of the local people that I suppose you call them the movers and the shakers, really, lawyers, accountants, the right people that I knew, and that's how we got to do the venue because it was quite a high class wine bar. Really, it, in the daytime it was packed with business people. They took an absolute fortune, but on a Tuesday and Wednesday night, he wanted to bring in the students. So that's how we started. So we would give the students like free shots. You get 2 vodkas, 1 for free. You get a bottle of wine that was say £17, say $20. They get it for 10. If there's 5 of them come in, then 2 would come in for free. You do the best. We would do the best dressed person that would come in, so the best girl that was dressed and the best guy that was dressed. They would come in for free, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what set us apart was that between me and 2 of the other chaps I was working with, we knew music. So we knew the current trends that were coming through. So we knew what young people were really going to like. So we got in some really cool DJs. The night would start at 8 and finish at 2. And we had queues up the road for about a year. When I was working with the 2 lads that were really good on the ground, and one of them was exceptional, that he would hit the students really, really hard and talk to them, and he would have a street team of about 4 or 5 people, and it just worked. And we were full every Wednesday for about a year. And the owners were really, really pleased.
Nice.
We had a few downtime. Of course we did. But generally we were pulling in 250 people every Wednesday night, and we were charging, I suppose £5, which would be about $7 at the time. And that paid for our DJs. That paid we didn't actually, the good thing, we didn't have to pay for the venue because the venue would just take the drink. So they said, we won't charge you for the venue. We're sell drink and food, and you can take the cover charge. If you want to sell CDs and merchandise, you can take that. So we sold a few CDs, but it was mainly the cover charge, which actually worked out quite well. So if we were having 250 people, we were doing £1,000 a night, £1,200 a night on the door, which our costs were probably about half that, maybe a bit less. Some of the DJs were sometimes £200-300 per night, but we knew when they come on the decks at 10 o'clock at night that the kids are going to love it. So that worked out really, really well. And we did that for probably about 2 years. And that sort of got me into the bug of sort of taking it further. Didn't really need to raise any money for that because it was, we could do it between the 3 of us quite easily. And that worked quite well. And it became quite systematic after a while. So when you do an event on a Wednesday, you finish on a Wednesday at 2 a.m. The production company comes away and takes the decks and the speakers and everything, and we will have a chat. The time I get home is sort of 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. So Thursday, I'm up at midday, exhausted, and then sort of by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I have to go again to start looking at the following week. Because it just doesn't stop. And that's one of the things that I found, and that probably comes back to me playing sport as well, Vincent, is you've got to be consistent. Lots of people are not consistent in just generally what they do. And you have to be massively consistent in what you do. If you don't do it, just don't bother. And what we did was every week we put out our flyers, every week we put out our posters, every week we were going to engage with the students. We'd talk to them. We'd even do talks with them about what they wanted, what music did they want, what DJs did they want, and that worked. That worked really, really well. And we was big on that because I think if you're going to do something, you've got to do it really, really properly.
Absolutely. And you even mentioned right before you kind of got into working with the university, you were kind of feeling that like burnout sensation after only a few years, but then you're reminded, okay, I gotta keep pushing and keep working hard. And then when you're in this position, that's reinforced again. It's like you got to keep being consistent and you got to keep doing these events if you want to keep them being successful.
Yeah, it's the difference between university is that some of the universities we work with, Vincent, they would have some of them would have £300,000-400,000 budgets to put on, their summer balls, and that's a heavy budget to do something for a university. And over a period of time, I know there was a few things that went wrong with some universities, and partly that was you had students that were in charge of vast sums of money. They didn't really know how to manage it, and I know that has all changed now in the UK, where you have professional companies that will come in and do stuff. And I think we were part of the, not say trailblazers, but we were one of the first that wanted to do stuff properly. And I think that runs with you. So it's the consistency of, I suppose, playing football on a Tuesday night when it's freezing cold. You don't want to be playing, but you have to, and you have to get a result with 11 people on the field. And that's the way I took. Even today, I'll still take that forward as much as I possibly can. So the two lads I was working with, I said we have to be consistent every week. We have to pass a message that we are here and this is what we do. And if people are going to come in and pay money to come into the, and in some cases you pay £8-9 for a glass of wine, you want to make sure that's a good night for people. Otherwise, they won't come back.
Absolutely.
And there were times when I got up in the morning and think, oh, I don't want to be doing this today. That's the last thing I want to be doing. But you have to, if you want to be I don't mean, a big global successful promoter, but if you just want to be successful promoter in your own patch and doing something positive, you have to be consistent.
And I like how earlier you did touch on your team and the people that you had around you that helped you kind of stay consistent, but also working towards their strengths. It sounds like you really found some business partners that were really good at things maybe you weren't as good as, but you were good. You had skills in ways that they didn't. So allowing that collaboration to kind of benefit the events was really important, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would. I think my sort of strength at that time was they couldn't go in front of a bank manager or investor or accountant or lawyer. That's not what they could do. So I would deal with all of that bit. They would deal with making sure people turned up. So they would do all the promotion. Even though I would deal with the promotion, it wasn't what I was doing day to day. I was making sure everything else that was run. The production company would turn up, making sure that the DJ would turn up, and the act that we got would turn up, and dealing with all of that really. But the two other lads that I had, they were just really good at in their lane. Really, they didn't want to. Even one of the lads would, for example, I would still be getting up on Thursday. He would still be in bed, for example, and he would only start on Saturday. But it didn't really worry me because his Saturday, Sunday, Monday, he would just go out and absolutely, demolish the city with what they would do. And it worked really well.
Yeah.
So I didn't put pressure. I don't believe putting pressure on people that, well, you have to do this 24/7. I think if you're good at what you do, then you should just have the time to do it. As long as you get the results, it didn't matter. And it did work really, really well. And I suppose at that time, I know lots changed now, but at that time it was, young people were looking to, they're in a new city in the UK. They want to experience new music. They want to have a good time, and you're competing with, lots of other bars and events, even on campus. Which I'm sure you've experienced. Stuff on campus can be really good. So trying to pull people off a campus to come into a wine bar on a Wednesday night,
yeah,
it can be difficult, but you just got to be consistent. And there were weeks when we might have had 100 people, 150 people, but we were pretty consistent every week. And I think that's the message really.
Most definitely. And I think it's important, like you said, if you want to do events for students, you got to give them free stuff, getting things for free.
Yeah, you've got to we one of the things that I did as well is when we went to see the student union, and we said to the student union guys, look, if you want to come to our night, it's free. You can effectively, we would say to them that you can come and you can have 2 or 3 beers, on us. You can come into the venue for nothing. But what we want from you is we want full access to the whole campus, to the whole 20,000 people. Because funny enough, I don't know if it's like in the US, Vincent, but in the UK, if you go and put flyers and posters up at a university and they don't know who you are, one, they prosecute you, and two, they just pull them all down, so no one knows what you're doing. So that was one of the things that I was good at, was basically saying to the uni, "This is what we'll do. Can we, are we able to do this?" And they went, "Absolutely." They didn't. They were quite happy for that because they saw it as, well, you're providing entertainment and activities for our students, and that's what we want to achieve, really.
Yeah, great. Absolutely. You got to kind of work with the people that want to work with you.
Yeah. And you are right, though, touching on a point. Students want everything for free.
So now I'm curious about how you've kind of used your experiences starting in event production in the 90s and then kind of translate that into now, today, or rather before the pandemic today. How has the event industry like really changed, and especially like in the UK scene? Like, how has your not only your mindset changed when putting on events, but also the work that you put into them? How has that shifted?
That's a good point, actually. I think I think the fundamentals um, are still the same. I think the fundamentals of actually, putting on an event haven't changed. But I think one of the things that I learned quite quickly, Vincent, was able to really put a business plan together and actually talk to the right people, accountants, lawyers, how you make things happen. Um, I think the UK, maybe over the last 5 years, from what I've seen, events have changed with a more immersed brand experience. So I think even when we're saying giving students sort of free stuff, for example, coming to an event, I don't think that's ever changed. I just think people expect bigger and better things now. So I think then when we would let people in for free and you get a free glass of wine, that was fantastic. Now people want to be absolutely wowed with a complete experience of foods from all over the world. Um, they want us different beers, different wines. They want to have car parking, that's ease of access. They want to be able to get on site and move around with ease of access. They want to experience the unsigned band right the way through to the global act. So I think lots changed in the experience. People, I wouldn't say don't go to the event to see the headliner, but I think a lot of people go for the experience with their buddies, camping, to have that barbecue, to have that beer, to have that food. So I think that's changed. I think the days are gone where you can actually put a stage in a field and expect 10,000 people to turn up and they're going to listen to the headline act. That's not going to happen. And I think people are too astute for that. So I think they just expect more.
Yeah.
And that's what I've seen over the last probably 5 years, really. You're probably still going to get some events where they maybe don't put on so much as others, but I think majority, you've got to, if you're starting a festival today, for example, you've got to stand out and you've got to make it work, because otherwise it's not going to happen year two.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's really like a lot of industries. It's really the consumer that has changed, and that's driving kind of where festivals are going. And now we're at a point. If you want to do a festival, you really have to be thinking about how do we make the fans, the customers, the clients happy. Maybe even, would you say, at the expense of maybe the quality of the music or the quality of the art?
um yeah, that's an interesting point. I would say, I personally, if I was doing an event today, I would concentrate on the full immersed experience. So I would concentrate on making sure that mum and dad, for example, say it was a family event, mum and dad were turning up with their children. So I would probably gear it to the mum, where she would turn up with a family. The parking was really easy. Um, Getting out was really easy. She could see that there was uh, emergency services on by if anything went wrong. There was like a creche or children's play area, so she knew her children were safe. Um, Dad, for example, then will be bought into that. There's different craft beers from around the world. Different foods. There could be pizza. There could be Indian. There could be Chinese. So then that for me, sort of sells the part of the family environment, and it's safe as well. So the security is really pleasant, really easy to deal with. They've got solid information about how the site works from when they arrive to when they leave. So I think, I don't want to downplay the act, because the act is still very integral to the event, but I think
Absolutely.
that partly does supersede a lot of stuff that goes on, because I think also that particular audience maybe want to experience the unsigned band that, for example, the children are well looked after in the children's play area. They've been fed. They're looked after really well. So mum and dad can go and experience the site. So then dad's free to go and have a beer, for example, especially if they haven't driven, and mum can have a glass of wine. They would stumble into an area and think, oh, that's actually quite a good act. And that would resonate with them because they're up close and personal with that particular artist. They never met that artist, but they feel they got a connection. When you're standing, I use a stupid scenario, but half a mile away from a main stage, you haven't got that connection. The only connection you've got is the person standing next to you that believes in the artist as well. So that's why people come to watch, big events, because they want that exciting, big lights, big sound, but they can't see the artist. That's why I think the more immersed experience and working with the more of the up and coming acts, you get more of an up close and personal. And I think it works really, really well. The extension of that is, and the horrific signs of that is, you've got to go and deal with the investor. So the investor knows that, to put 10,000 people in a field, and where you've got to go and convince them, you need a headline act that's going to sell you 10,000 tickets.
Yeah.
But you've got to put that experience around it. And I think that's where it works. So if you've got, Carly Simon, U2, Dave Grohl, for example, they're going to sell out, but you've still got to give that, if they're paying $50, $100, $200, whatever that figure is, you've got to give that family and those people a really great experience. I know that's why we was always big on the way that I started, and I think that's always stayed with me. And I don't think that should change. But I do think the experience over time has changed. Have you found that in the US with festivals, people want more of a immersed experience and more value for their money? Has it sort of worked for you?
Yeah, most definitely. And I just think it was really interesting, those things that you're listing now today, if you were to do an event, because what a quite stark contrast, as you were talking about your first event, right? Like your first event was geared towards students, and you explained that really well, but it was not on the level of the things you would do now. And so it's interesting how that's changed. And I'm thinking back to like the early festivals, right? Like Woodstock. Woodstock was a festival that was thrown in a random field in upstate New York that was all about the music, right? There was no facilities. There was just hippies in a field sleeping out of their vans, and a stage where they would see good music. And to answer your question, today, could you do that? I don't know. I'm uncertain, because I look at the major festival that's driving the music industry being Coachella in America, being Coachella. Absolutely, Coachella is not only about the music. They have fantastic music, and they have a great lineup every year with the big artists, with new artists. But now it's definitely shifted into more of a cultural phenomenon, where you go there, you want to take your pictures, you want to go see the artwork, you want to go see the big elaborate creations that they've done, eat some good food and things like that. So I would say that the festival industry has shifted from just being about music acts to being about the customer experience.
That's a really interesting point as well, because looking at the sort of some of the first festivals, and my business partner, Rebecca's mum, she attended the very first UK festival, which was on the Isle of Wight. And that had Bob Dylan. She sat on a field with probably about 250,000 people at the time, Vincent. And she managed to see Peter, Paul and Mary, Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, and that was a massive, massive experience. Would that happen today? No, again, probably not. So the Isle of Wight, the very first festival, and like Woodstock, would they come around? No, I don't think they would. But I think if you get the music right and you get the immersed experience right, then I think you've got a lot of things well. And even now, people, over the last maybe 10 years, maybe, the corporate hospitality, where you can actually sell your tickets and sell your corporate hospitality packages, to companies for that privilege of having a nice glass of wine, having the food on tap and having the accommodation is all part of the experience. And I think I think if you've come into the festival today thinking you don't need to do any of that, I think you're going to be sorely mistaken, because I think you're going to need to go way above and beyond of what's expected.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think it's important to kind of put a asterisk on this statement, because I have been in Northern California, where there's a very prevalent counterculture festival movement where it's grassroots and they're all about music and all about just kind of hanging out, being dirty in the forest, listening to music. And that's absolutely happening a lot around the world right now. There's a lot of people that are genuinely all about the music and want to kind of just be out in the wild listening to music. But I think we're more so talking about a major festival with the incentive of making money and about getting tens of thousands of people. I don't think you can get to a point of having that many people at a festival without all these kind of things that we've recently stated.
No, no, I don't think you can. And I think you've got to set your stall out about what you actually want to achieve from that festival, um, and your vision of about what you want to do. Because I think, and I suppose this comes back to the internet, to touch on what we were speaking about earlier on. Back in the 90s, the mid 90s, the internet was sort of just coming around, and I got pushed into it. I got pushed into computers, not something that I really was interested in. I didn't really find them engaging. I just wasn't really that bothered. Now I live my life by a computer, so it just shows you how things have changed. And I think the internet's done some fantastic things over the years, with access to information and being able to do, but it's also can be detrimental, because I think people, when you go onto a site and someone reviews something, whether you bought something from Amazon or your local shop down the road, there's always someone that'll be negative on that experience. And I think that's what partly annoys me, because you've got a lot of people that can go online that can just be detrimental to an event or to something, and actually they've not really experienced it properly. And I think that's where the internet can be destructive, and can be difficult. But I think you just got to be able to set your stall out, do it properly, and actually have a proper plan going forward. Because if you don't have a proper plan, proper business plan, have a proper attorney, proper accountant, and a ton of cash behind you, depending on what you want to do, then you've got half a chance. But I think if you get those things wrong, and if you don't treat your customer right, they won't return. They're not going to pay $100 to come back to your festival when you've had a security guard be rude to them, or your team's been rude to them, or they've had a really bad experience. That's down to you. That doesn't. You can't go and blame someone else for that. That's your problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people forget. And I've been at festivals as well, Vincent, where people have just not been treated at all, well. I got invited to a festival a few years ago, and it was quite a big festival, and they sort of had the press to a point, but they said, "Oh, would you look after the press?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And this was a perfect example. This was a 15,000 capacity festival. It's over 3 days, so had 50,000 people over 3 days. They're really big acts as well. Sort of Happy Mondays, Calvin Harris, Supergrass. It was all sorts of acts. And so I effectively, having dealt with quite a lot of press over the years, I ended up dealing with all the photographers. And this one photographer turned up, and he didn't get dealt with particularly well. And one of the ladies come over to me and said, "Oh, Pete, got this photographer here. He says he's from one of the national, Daily Mirror, The Sun, and we're not sure." So I go over and have a chat with him, and he's got all his kit, and he's a real top guy. Got on really well with him. He was basically a freelance photographer for all the British Nationals newspapers.
Okay.
And he said, "Look, I've been sent down by my boss. I've got to capture, as much of this festival as possible. Can you help me?" I said, "Yeah." He was really cool. I got him in, and I said, "Anything you need, you just come to me. Don't worry about anyone else. You just come and talk to me." And over the weekend, he got some. I've got all the shots today actually that he did. He took over about 200-300 shots over the weekend. He syndicated them across Europe and the US. So he was really happy. But the one thing that I did for him, because he was just a really cool guy to work with, I'm still friends with him today. I've not spoken to him for a while. And he funny enough, he lived in New York and he's still in New York as a paparazzi photographer in New York. But I closed the pit for him. On the Sunday afternoon, I said to security, this comes back to relationships as well, Vincent, and actually how you deal with people. So I got on really well with security. They'd done a lot of my events. I saw the head of security. I said, on the Sunday afternoon, early evening, can I have my photographer go into the pit with no other photographers, no one else, so he can have 5 minutes taking the pictures of the headline acts and the support act? They went, yeah. So I closed the pit for him. He went in there, with his fantastic Canon camera and his Nikons and shooting away. They actually gave him 10 minutes. They gave him 2 songs. He came out and he had some phenomenal shots. No one ever has ever done that for him. And he never forgot that. He phoned me up a couple of days later, gave me all the pictures, and he treated me to lunch for that. He said that was an amazing experience. And he said, I wish there were so many people like you to be able to facilitate that. And I said, unfortunately, Jay, there isn't. There's so many people on this planet that I call them clipboard people, is that they just want to get something ticked off a box and they're not worried about anything else. They don't know how to deal with people. And that really, really bothered me. But what happened with the festival, they got front page on 4 newspapers across the world, and 5 of their pictures got syndicated to the US. So my argument to the main promoters were, I just got you a load of press that you would never normally got, because some of your staff are just, or some of your people just don't know how to deal with stuff. So that's just a lesson, really. But it was a good one. But he was great. He was really good.
Absolutely. Yeah. You got to be flexible, and you got to be willing to kind of make some things happen. Maybe that might be different than how they normally happen, and you might find a lot of success from that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's I think you just got to be prepared. And I'm not saying everyone's the same, but I think if you come into this business, you've got to have a massive thick skin, and you've also got to be polite to people. You've got to be able to put up with no's, because this business is funny. I forgot a comment the other week, one of the American producers we work with, and he said this business is no first and yes second. And I thought, I've never heard that before. That's actually very, very true.
Yeah.
It is no first. You might get 1,000 no's before you get that one yes. And I thought that was actually quite a good point.
And I'm curious about your perspective on how the UK festival scene has really impacted the US festival scene, because I've growing up in California have always looked at like the UK and the European festival scene as being like extremely impressive. If we're talking about like Glastonbury with 150,000 people over the weekend, or some of these other bigger European festivals like Tomorrowland. Have you really felt like those huge festivals have really impacted the US festival scene?
Yeah, I think so, and I think I'd call it I suppose a collaborative effort between the UK, Europe, and the US, because I think UK acts want to perform in the US, and US acts want to perform in the UK. And I think what's happened over the years is that festivals have got bigger. People want to see bigger and better acts. They also want that immersed experience. And I think maybe over the last decade, a lot of the, I suppose, not infrastructure, but a lot of the stuff that's put together in UK festivals, I think, is seeped over into the US, because I think maybe the US festivals are now looking at, actually, we give this experience. Now our audience want this. I think we would achieve this if we do this. So I think there are lots of similarities with, like you say, Tomorrowland's, Glastonbury. You've got Tea in the Park. You've got Isle of Wight Festival. So what you tend to find, Vincent, is that you will get the major US artist that will pretty much headline every single UK festival. And I'm talking Glastonbury, Tea in the Park, Reading and Leeds, maybe Lock and Load, Isle of Wight Festival, and then they would go on to Europe and maybe do like you say, Tomorrowlands. They might do Exit Festival in Serbia. Some of them might go on to do like which was Monsters of Rocket Donington, um, all sorts. So I think what's happened over time is it's just been a more clean cut way of putting stuff together. And I think the US have sort of, from your perspective, even though the US is far bigger than the UK, I think the UK still provide a great festival scene. And I think the US have benefited from that because obviously they want their acts to perform. And I think it works in both ways where the UK artists want to come over to the US. And I think that's rubbed off a little bit with the promoters. So maybe it's worked. I suppose it works in quite a cohesive way, really. I can't think any more way of sort of describing that, to be honest.
No, yeah, I think you really kind of sum that up really well, because I do think I totally agree. I do think it has been a collaboration, but I definitely think that there has been a few things that the US has modeled from the European UK version of how you guys do festivals. Because it has seemed like the US festival scene has changed a bit over the few decades.
How would you say it's changed from your perspective? Is it more of a immersed experience? Are the kids wanting more for their money, or is it, you know?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say because I've only been doing festivals now for about the past 5 years, but I think it's definitely changed in the sense that like a Glastonbury festival is very like a lot of people in a huge outdoor facility. So if we like look at like a festival like Coachella, it's kind of modeled in a similar way.
Yeah, yeah,
And I know Coachella didn't start till the late '90s, and I believe Glastonbury was started well before that.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I think that model of going from a club to a field in the middle of nowhere has really kind of been a collaboration effort, like you said, between looking at the other major festivals that have been successful and kind of adopted that in the American model.
Yeah, and I think also as well. I think coming back to the point of view of the US labels, for example, some of the US labels I've sort of spoken to and sort of attended stuff with some of the UK governing bodies. A lot of the money would come out of the US to fund some of the UK labels. There'd be subsidiaries of them, for example. And I'd always see, even though we're a small island, I'd always have this feeling and conversations with the US executives or just US bands or just generally US people that the UK was always seen as the place that US acts have got to perform. And it's a really weird. I don't think that's ever changed, Vincent, because it's the same with UK acts. You get a UK act
Absolutely.
that wants to perform in the US because if they break the US, then it's global
Yeah, it
effectively.
feels like the world. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the same for the UK. When you get the big US, artists that headline Glastonbury, Isle of Wight Festival, for example, they feel they've arrived and they've been accepted into the world of music. And I also think as well, it's sort of like that natural progression, and it has been a collaboration. And also as well, what you touched on earlier, coming from a club environment where you've got infrastructure all built into that room, and coming from an environment where you've got a budget from university to be able to pay for stuff, to suddenly go to a field um, of you know 200 acres, 50 acres, and you've got to put a stage, lighting, security, um, food, drink, water, emergency services. It sort of gives you an enlightening experience, really. So I think um, that certainly gives you a breath of fresh air, and you sort of have to take a big gulp of it and think, how am I going to deal with this? But I do
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
these big festivals, I think the big festivals have happened more and more so now with the infrastructure of Live Nation. So Live Nation are able to construct big US festivals. They're able to obviously come over to the UK and Europe and support that as well. Same with AEG. So it's all about collaboration. I don't think the big festivals would existed unless there wasn't collaboration. And also as well, record companies are not silly. They see US market for, okay, we can do 10, 15 festivals in the US, but we really need to get over to Europe to crack that. And I think it's just the way that it's worked over the years, really.
So now, Peter, I really want to talk about your vision for the music industry right now and like going forward. And I'm really curious to talk about your company, Seamless Entertainment, and what the vision you have for it, and going forward, how you guys are going to work within the music industry and maybe work to change the music industry.
Well, that's a good point, Vincent. It's one actually I was speaking with Rebecca today, funny enough, especially because I come from this side of the business, as you know, and Rebecca comes from the performance side. So we have both different perspectives of how the industry is going. But the one thing that we do completely agree on, and actually we have an extended team as well. So Rebecca works with Alan Glass, who's sort of like a global producer for like Aretha Franklin. He worked with George Benson and pretty much everyone in between. And we're all pretty much on the same page, really. The way we think Seamless was born out of frustration, and Seamless is exactly is the name. We want to provide a seamless transaction for the artist, the venue, the sync placement, the publicist, whatever that might be. That's why that exists. How we feel the industry is going is that we know over the last several years the synchronization world is quite powerful. So you can actually break an app from one single in a TV show, in a film, in a computer
Absolutely.
game, and that's everyone's been jumping on the bandwagon on that in the last 10 years. So that's even more competitive now. But I don't think that's ever going to change because that's a real great area that we work in, and I think you can find new music, and new music does get an opportunity within sync placements. But you just have to be persistent, and you just have to sort of, again, come to the table properly. The other area I think within that is obviously publishing. Publishing is never going to go away. Publishing is a funny enough. I was chatting to one of the artists last week that we know quite well, and he said publishing is a black art. It's never going to go away, and it's difficult to understand. And he's absolutely right. I've worked with people. I worked with a very good guy actually no longer with us. He was phenomenal in publishing. So I think that is going to be around forever, effectively, at least another couple of decades before people really do maybe fully understand publishing. So I think publishing and sync are really, really good. I think merchandise off of that is another key thing of actually creating your brand and creating sustainability. And I think streaming, I think in the UK, I don't know if you've read, but the UK is actually taking the major labels at the moment to task, because there's quite a lot of acts that are just now start complaining that are not receiving the royalties and streaming revenue that they should. But this goes back to me working at the labels back in the day when they didn't really understand internet, and they all buried their head in the sand, and suddenly that's why Napster got born, and you suddenly saw millions of downloads all illegally done. So
yes,
streaming is there to exist, and it's there to exist maybe for the 1%. I think if they get a slightly better level playing field, then I think that's going to be better. I think now, from when I was working at the labels, what's changed massively is that, again, Rebecca is an artist in her own right. She can actually set up her own website. She can actually distribute her music. She can put onto our social media, on her Twitter, on her Instagram. She can collaborate with producers, and that's all great. That for me, I think is exciting, and that's exciting with streaming, and that's exciting to put your music out there. Still, big downfall for me within this is the publicity. It costs a fortune to actually publicize your music or anything, for example. So I think that is still the fly in the ointment. And that comes back to the point of the streaming companies and the labels still want to control the majority of it because they want to push all the acts that they've got. They don't want to let anyone else come in. So you've got that difficulty. But having said that, I still think it's a positive area. And I also think, even though because you and I are doing this at the moment, one of the other things that I think has taken off and will take off in the next couple of years even more is podcast. Because I think podcast is a great medium for me talking to you. And again, Rebecca working with Alan, they put out an EP. They can distribute that and they can start talking to people, but then they've got a broadcast platform to be able to talk about their new products, about what they're doing. And I think that is a great, great medium. Podcast obviously is more difficult to make money from, as we know. And I
Truly.
think that will, yeah, I think it's again, maybe the top few percent earn a fortune, but I think podcasters can earn money. I think if you get it right and you get it positioned right, I think you can. It just takes a bit of time. But I think podcast, streaming, publishing, merchandise, I think are all the way to go. And publishing will be the single one I think that will outdo everything over time, because the song is the king, and I think that's what people have actually forgotten over the years, that the song will last forever. So we've worked with people that represent different estates, Vincent, for different music, and that song will live on for decades, and it will still make money on publishing and synchronization. So that's never going to change. Just the whole model of the
Yeah.
industry's changed. And I think it's more in favor of the indie artist. And I think we will see a big shift with the indies in the next, maybe not 5 years, but the next 12 months, because I think there'll be a lot more music out there. It's just shifting through that to be able to do that. And I think that's exciting. That for me is exciting, and I think the podcast phenomenon is only going to continue. I think that's really exciting as well. So yeah, I think that's sort of route for change. And if the UK government hold the labels to task with the streaming, you might see a little bit more money going into the artist's pocket as well to be able to do stuff. So I think it's a good time for artists to be self-sufficient in what they do, but it's trying to still compete with the big boys, which is always a difficult area.
Yeah, and that's been the challenge of the artists since the 19th century, right? That's been the uphill battle they're going through. But I really like how you talk about Seamless is a company you started based around your networking abilities, based around being able to connect with people in ways that you touched on earlier in this podcast, of learning those things at an early age, of coming into the music industry, relating with people when you're when you had the internship, relating with people when you're just starting to do those university events, and creating a company based around all these different facets you just touched on. Is understanding the music industry is not just a 1-2 and done industry anymore. It's an industry that involves so many of these aspects and so many of these different caveats within just getting a music out and getting a band to be famous, right? There's so much more opportunity for business within the music industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me that's quite exciting, because I didn't think I would do any blogs, for example. So that's one of the other things I was talking to Becky about the last few days is the amount of sort of traction and the way that our blogs go now, and we sort of back that with our podcast, and it's providing awareness and visibility really. But it's for twofold. It's providing that for what we do at Seamless, but it's also providing solid information as best as we can into the community. And I think that's probably a good way. And I quite like the way that podcast works, because you can't hide behind a podcast. You can either talk about what you know, or you get found out very quickly. And I think that's the detriment to a lot of websites. There's lots of websites that you come across and you think, I don't actually, did you do that? I'm not really too sure.
Yeah.
Or coming back to your point when we first spoke, when people say, oh yeah, I'm really busy, I'll get back to you next week. They're not, to be honest with you. And that's why I come back from the perspective of when I was working at the labels, and sometimes I would, see the chairman of one of the labels. They are busy. Don't get me wrong, they are busy. They're pulled here, there, and everywhere, because they're global heads of major corporations. But they still sometimes have time for you to have a chat and a cup of tea, and what you're up to, because they're human beings at the end of the day. So that bit doesn't bode well with me. And I think the stigma of the record industry has got to change. There's still too many people in it that think they've just, born with a golden ticket and they don't want to do anything for it. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And that's why I think, some of the successful event management companies or promoters that I've known, they've worked really hard to get where they are, and they have worked really hard, and they deserve to, to where they be. But I think the industry will keep on changing, Vincent. Bands will come and go, artists will come and go, but if you get a platform right and you get the right mechanics right within publishing, streaming, podcasting, merchandise, then I think people have got a shot. And I think it is time for the indies to do something,
Absolutely.
and do something positive. Yeah.
Yeah, and I really agree with you about kind of the secrecy or the kind of shadiness that happens within the music industry, and that's actually been a huge goal of mine with my podcast, and I'm sure with yours as well, is to kind of break down those like hidden barriers within the industry and to get people to talk about what they've done in like honest truths, because it was hard for me coming into it, graduating from college, trying to talk to people. It's like it was almost like pulling teeth trying to like speak with people and to actually sit down and have conversations with people that I was working with or that I would see around or hear like, oh, this person does this. But there's like a lack of a genuine wanting to disperse of information or wisdom within the industry. It's kind of dumbfounds me that I have to really like nag people for months, even before I had the podcast, of just being like, hey, I need help. Like I want to understand things better. I want to learn things more about the industry. Like, can you help me? Like I felt there was definitely like a lacking of that. So it's been a goal of mine with this podcast of to show people, to highlight perspectives out there similar to like yours, of people. There are genuine people in the industry that do have wisdom that they're willing to share.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. And I think when you approached and, said about your podcast, and that's why I'm always happy to, accommodate where I can, because I think, your podcast, our podcast, there's another podcast in the UK that's doing sort of not similar things, but they sort of do a chat and in between with other bits and pieces that they do, and it works quite well. And I'm thinking, well, if we get the message out, and even some of the guests we've had on, on the show, they've all been really, proactive, and I think it works. It works really well. And I think, I don't know what it is with this industry where people got to hold stuff really close to their chest. I partly put it down to people are scared of losing their job, Vincent,
Yeah, most
and
definitely.
also they're also incompetent as well. A lot of people are promoted. If I leave you with anything to like, take this with you. People are promoted to a level of incompetence. Okay, that is very, very true, because you end up meeting a lot of people and you think, what do you do? What do you do? And they can't
Yeah.
tell you. But all they're interested in doing is buying their new suit, buying their new dress, buying their new heels, getting a new handbag, but they're not actually willing to do anything. And they turn around and say, well, I work for XYZ, or I work for this. Well, do you? So there is a lot of that. I don't think we'll ever change that, but I think the more that we can demystify, um, you know, this business, then I think the better, really.
Yeah, most definitely. Let's like break down those secretive walls and kind of have a little bit more clear communication. I will definitely be linking your podcast, The Entertainment Engine, in the description of this video, as well as your website for Seamless. So people that are interested can kind of check it out, because I like how on your podcast, you not only have the music business side, but you do have some artists and some producers on there to talk about kind of the music side as well. Is there anything that we kind of skipped over or you kind of want to retouch on before we end here?
No, I don't think so, Vincent. I think the only thing I can say is, it's a pleasure to speak with you. And there's probably a couple of people I can talk to, maybe coming onto your show. There's a US attorney. She's actually quite cool. I think the more noise we make and what we're all doing, then I think the better, to be honest.
Absolutely. And I think there's going to be a lot of shifting in the music industry. So like you said, staying on top of it, I think the ways that we're going about it are definitely ways to stay progressive within the music industry and stay on top of the ball, as they say.
Well, and also as well, before we leave each other, the other analogy I'll give you is that you might go on in a couple of years' time, for example, 5 years' time, I don't know, and you're head of Sony or you're head of Columbia,
I hope.
and you don't know. So you don't know. I don't know that. You don't know that. You
Yeah.
just don't know what's around the corner. Honestly, you don't know what's around the corner, and you could think, actually, I need someone to come in to run my events, or I want a consultant. Hopefully you'd pick up the phone to someone like me and say, actually, Pete, would you come in and do this? And I go, of course. And you're head of a label, you're head of a big corporation.
Yeah.
And that's where people get things wrong, because if you deal with that person right, I'm not saying it happens all the time, because it doesn't, Vincent, but if you deal with that person right, you never know what's around the corner. You just don't. And I think that's where I think that's where the record industry has partly gone wrong, because a lot of stuff has gone wrong because I think people haven't dealt with stuff properly, to be perfectly honest.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I think keeping those connections is really important. And just like you kind of said earlier, you got to be nice to everyone. So then down the road, you never know what they can do for you or you can do for them.
Even if it's just having a cup of coffee and having a chat,
Yes.
something comes out, you just don't know. I don't know, but I think the industry is quite powerful at the moment. So I think the indie sector could be quite powerful, and I think if we sort of try and capitalize on this as much as possible, this is why I think in the lockdown period, not to sort of go on about what's going on with the pandemic, as we all know, but I think the one thing that's positive is giving people time. I probably wouldn't have done a podcast. Becky wouldn't have done a podcast. You might not have done a podcast. Life would have still carried on. So I think it's given people a reset button to be able to look at things differently and go, actually, I'm going to do this now.
Yes, absolutely. That's very true. Well, Peter, I want to thank you again for coming on to Behind the Pulse and sharing your wisdom with me. I think you really said a lot of things that not only I have learned from, but people listening will as well.
No, it's a pleasure, Vincent, and thanks for inviting me on. I'll share what you're doing. I think it comes back to my analogy of playing football. If you've got a good, solid team, even though we're all doing our own thing, I think if you've got a good team of people around you, then anything's possible.
Absolutely. Sometimes you got to pass the ball to score.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Great. Exactly. Thank you, Peter.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vincent. All the best.
All right, y'all. Yes, that wraps up another episode of Behind the Pulse, the longest one yet. Thank you for sticking with me, and I hope you learned some good stuff, because I know I did. Big shout out to Peter for coming on the show. I think he shared a really great perspective. I got a lot more great episodes coming up soon, so please connect with me. You'll find the links down in the description of this video, as well as ways to connect with Peter. Thank you so much for listening. Peace.